BP had lost the work that he used to do for Maguire Farming Enterprises. Since he'd decided to do no more work for Maguire, two of his staff who used to work full-time on the estates and things that he looked after that abruptly left and started up on their own. And they took all of that estate work. They were the only staff that he had apart from young Hunter Joe Gunter. And in some ways, BP, he was quite glad that the staff had gone. Too much paperwork with staff. It was going to make a bit of a dent into his income, though. He picked Hunter up early as usual and said they were going to a negotiation. There was a large orchardist who had contacted BP. This orchardist's fruit trees were bowing under the weight of the crop this year. It was one of those years that the trees just had so much fruit on them, and he couldn't get hold of enough fruit bins for the pickers. The trees they didn't have a season like this every year, and he wanted to make the most of it. He only had a short length of time. Now, BP had a little portable sawmill, and some months earlier he'd cleared a windbreak of old man pine, and he'd sawed up the better logs, and it was all stacked in a shed. BP came in, I'll go again there. Hunter came into the meeting with BP and the orchardist. The orchardist seemed to be driving a hard bargain to Hunter. They were both doing a bit of gesticulating and backwards and forwards, and BP did some back-of-envelope calcs and passed over a figure for the orchardist. BP said to me he wouldn't and he couldn't do it for any less than that. The orchardist agreed, but he wanted them now. He needed those fruit bins. BP had him wait for a moment and went outside to have a talk to Hunter. And he told Hunter for the next 2 weeks they were going to be living and working on the site, and asked Hunter if he was in. Hunter agreed, but he'd have to be at night school on some nights still. Smith had been adamant about that. BP went back inside and shook hands with the orchardist. He dropped Hunter back at his home and told him to meet him at the shed. It wasn't too far from the Gunter's residence. Hunter told his mum what was happening. He went out to the loft and packed the bag with what he would need. Hunter rode Moxy over to the shed to meet up with BP. BP outlined his plan. The rest of the day they were setting up a production line, making jigs and clean-flowing workspaces. They worked till the light went down and were all set to go the next day. Before dawn, BP was up boiling the billy, and Hunter joined him. They had a couple of cups of tea. Hunter was having a bit of a chat to BP while they were having their billy tea, and BP told him if he could pull this off, there'd be a pretty healthy bonus for Hunter as well. So they had some wheat bix, and then they were into it. Earmuffs and safety glasses on, they just worked solidly. Dragging out timber, cutting it on the docking saw, putting it in the jig, nail gunning it, stacking them up for the flatbed truck to come and pick up. BP was tireless, whistling, and with a smile on his face, almost always with a smile on his face. He worked in shorts, a singlet and boots, pretty much every day. Even when it was snow on the ground, he'd almost be like that. On one side of his shoulder there were big scars. Lots of people asked BP how he got them. Fell in a gorse bush and wrestled it, was what he normally replied. They were cutting and nailing every day as the sun came up until the sun went down. They had a camp stretcher each in the barn and a gas ring to boil the endless cups of tea. There was one pot stew every night with bread. Hunter went to his night school with Glasgow, but missed the others. There was no way he was going to miss the leather class, though. It was the last one. As they were having bread and stew, BP said, "A little bird told me last Friday you must have been lost. Did you miss the turn-off?" Hunter blushed, glad it was dark. "No, just dropping a friend off," he told BP. BP smiled and asked no more. He'd been visiting a friend opposite the orphanage with his ute parked around the back of the house, so Hunter wouldn't have seen it. But BP had seen Moxy. He was glad the lad thought it quite normal to use a giant horse as personal transport. He wasn't sure who the young lady was, though. Hunter scrubbed up using the hose that doubled for their shower and headed off for the creative leather class. He worked on a table with Molly. They were all putting the finishing touches on their projects. Molly lent him a tool to carve his name on the bag. HJG, he carved into it. Hunter helped her cut some extra heavy pieces of leather she was splitting to stitch to the wear points on the jacket. Before you knew it, the class was over. Molly wanted to know what Hunter was up to, and he told her. She asked if she could come and see on the Saturday afternoon, and he said sure. When he asked how her week was, she just said eventful. He asked if she needed a lift, but she said she had a lift. Hunter felt slightly disappointed. Molly had an apple for Moxy, though, and she took it out, and Moxy did his normal crunch crunch. Then they went their separate ways. As Hunter left, he thought he saw Molly get into a Rolls Royce. The only Rolls he knew of was Glocky's. Glocky was a friend of his dad's, Smith, and occasionally Hunter would trap rats if the gardener noticed them getting into the compost up at the Glocky estate. That was most strange, he thought. Must be mistaken. When he got back, he fell straight into his camp bed. BP was up talking to a friend who had called by. BP seemed to be able to stay up half the night and still work flat out all day. They had a real good rhythm going and progress was good. It was a hot day and they were both covered in sawdust and sweat. A pink bike with a carrier on the front came in the driveway and rang its bell. BP looked up and saw a young woman. He couldn't be sure, but he thought she was the one who had been on the horse with Hunter. They stopped and Hunter apologised to BP that he'd forgotten to tell him she may call in. BP said, "Time for a cuppa and a bite." Hunter introduced her to BP and BP took her hand and with a bow said, "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." Molly had been at the farmer's market and as usual everything sold, but she'd kept 4 muffins back. They were her strawberry muffins. They were just the best. They chatted for a bit and BP was very taken with her. She knew they'd be here for another week and asked if they'd like some more muffins later in the week, and the reply was, "You bet." Before she left, she went over to Moxy and fed him an apple. When she left, BP said, "If I was 50 years younger, she has a wonderful demeanour." The bike Molly was on was Marissa's. Marissa never rode it and told Molly she could just use it. On Monday morning, the police turned up. The school hall had burned down. The fire chief found the centre point of the fire and had an analysis done. Gunpowder. There was an eyewitness who said it was the same lad whose picture had been in the paper earlier in the year. "Get down and arrest that hoodlum Hunter," the police chief had told his detective and the young constable Eric, possibly getting a bit of relief from their traffic duty. They had gone to Hunter's house only to find out he wasn't there, and Smith wanted to know what it was about. "Police business," the detective said. Smith told them where he was and followed them there. The police chief had set it up. McGuire wanted that Gunter boy in jail and the envelope had been full. The criminal who had set the fire was far away. The police chief was not happy. The fire was meant to be lit in the early hours of the morning, but instead it had started at 10 o'clock Sunday night. They were still waiting for the full lab results of the fire, but all the preliminaries indicated gunpowder, and the chief knew there would be no change from that. His eyewitness was solid. He wouldn't blab, too much to lose, and a nice small envelope of his own. The police rolled in and arrested Hunter, not prepared to listen to anything. Smith phoned his lawyer, and his lawyer was the same one as Glocky's, probably the best lawyer in town. The young constable stayed behind to take a statement from BP and Smith. Where was Hunter last night? He was surprised when BP said here. "Do you mean here, like in this yard?" asked Eric. BP showed him the camp stretchers. Then BP told him to go and check with a friend of his who had been having a brew of tea and yarning until well after 11 o'clock. Eric took the name and went to interview the friend. The story stacked up. There was no way Hunter could have been there starting the fire. Eric went back to the station house to talk to the detective who was in the room with Hunter. Hunter had been advised by Smith to say nothing till his lawyer got there. The detective wasn't having much of that and was trying to get Hunter to admit to starting the fire. Eric knocked on the interview room at the same time as Smith's lawyer arrived. He interrupted the detective, who was annoyed, but Eric said, "You better see this." The detective swore when he saw the statements. They were watertight. There was no way the kid could have done it. The chief saw Hunter being escorted out of the building and wanted to know what was going on. The detective explained. The captain seemed surprisingly calm after having demanded so vigorously that the detective prosecute the case and get that hoodlum Hunter into jail. He handed the detective an envelope. The detective was being reassigned to another precinct. The envelope had a small amount of cash in it. He knew he was being moved aside for some reason, but he wasn't going to argue. This new number would be a cushy number for a while. The police chief was going to have to be careful here and cover his tracks somewhat. Maguire wasn't too pleased when he was informed. It seemed every time he came up against the Gunters, his plans were foiled. Maybe it was time to step this game up a bit and move the Gunters on one way or another. Smith and Hunter went back to the lawyer's office. He had looked into the destruction order against the big horse Moxy as well. It wasn't official, even though it appeared so. The court system had no official record of the order. He told them to ignore it. As far as he had worked out, Maguire law had something to do with it. Over the years, the lawyer had heard of people connected with the Maguires going missing or having unfortunate accidents. He warned Smith to be careful. Hunter got back to BP and got a couple of hours work in before sundown. They had a good yarn while having their stew that night. Hunter slept with restless dreams which seemed hazy and distant the next morning. Hunter didn't see Molly that week. She didn't turn up. Late on the Saturday, however, a Rolls Royce pulled up and out hopped Molly. She had a hamper with her. BP said it was time to stop for the day. Molly had cooked them up a feed and a half. There was a stack of marinated chops and 3 salads, a potato salad, a beetroot salad, and a coleslaw. Now, Pete didn't usually eat salads. This time he polished off everything left over after they had eaten their fill. Hunter wondered if BP was sick of the stews as well. It was like having real restaurant quality food, only even better. They had a small fire going and the billy was hanging over it. BP made bush tea for all of them. BP could drink endless cups of tea. He could almost have a cup in his hand from dawn till dusk. And after seeing how much food he put away, Hunter wondered where it went. There was no polite way to say it, but BP was skinny. They were sitting there around the fire telling yarns. Well, mostly it was BP telling yarns. They were good yarns that kept your attention. Molly asked BP how he got those big scars. Hunter thought they were about to hear the gorsebush story. He was surprised when BP said, "Time for another brew and I'll tell you a tale." Molly made the brews, and they tasted better than when BP did it too. BP started. He told them he knew the rumours people told about a lion, but that wasn't true. It was a tiger. BP took his singlet off. There were deep scars running up one side of his back onto his shoulder. He said it got him good. Molly asked if she could touch the scar. BP let her. It felt smooth and cool to the touch. BP put his singlet back on and got on with the story. Many years ago, when he was a young and fit man and having adventures around the world, he had been working on a rail project in India, in the jungle. He was well out in front of the crew, preparing land and laying track. He was surveying and marking out the track, double-checking that the original plan was sound. An Indian family passed by on a track running beside the embankment that BP was up on. There were 6 of them, two grandparents, two parents and two children, and they had a small cart. BP called out to tell them to be careful. There had been reports of tigers in the area. All these years later, he wondered why he had said that. How could you be careful on a small dirt track, travelling with no protection? Come to think of it, how could he be careful up on the embankment with no protection? There were reports of people missing. It would seem there was a man-eater in the area. He'd seen a tiger once in the distance, just a glimpse, then it vanished into the jungle. Just a tiger in the distance. The family had a good luck charm with them. They reckoned it would protect them from any harm. Only that morning they had made offerings at the temple. BP wished them well. Then it happened. Dreadful and in slow motion. But it wasn't slow. It was vast and devastating and terrifying. BP's voice was low and mesmerising. His eyes were distant as he remembered. There was a rustling in the long grass, a mighty heart-stopping roar, and an orange and black blur. The tiger in one bound exploded from the grass onto the embankment. In another bound it was onto the dirt track. It seized the little girl in its mouth, leapt back onto the embankment and back to the grass and was gone. There was shock all around and stunned silence. BP was physically trembling in his boots. The display of ferocity and power had stunned him. The family were in shock. The women were weeping and the men gesticulating wildly. The small boy had leapt onto the cart, pulling a cover over himself. Before BP could think of what to say, they were gone, and as soon as he processed it himself, which must have been a couple of minutes, he kept looking at the track, the embankment, the grass, and just the sheer horror of it all, and he fled back to the rail camp. He told his supervisor about it. They were completely unsympathetic. Happens all the time. Don't worry about it. Don't unsettle the men. He asked what about himself out the front, and was told if he didn't like it, there were plenty more people who would love that job. BP asked the management, why doesn't someone do something about it? There was just a shrugging of shoulders. As he left the meeting, one of the Indian workers who had heard the conversation took him aside. He showed Hunter a prized possession. It was a .45 caliber black powder muzzle-loading rifle, complete with a 2-foot bayonet. It was wrapped up in oil paper and seemed to be in perfect condition. BP made a wild choice. He told Hunter and Molly that he was young and foolish and didn't really know why he did what he did, but it just seemed so wrong what had happened, and everyone seemed indifferent to it. Before he left, BP went to the welder's tent and got a welder's leather jacket and gauntlets. He took the rifle, thanking the man who gave it to him. It wasn't like I'd never been hunting before, BP explained to them. And he told them, in his humblest manner, that he'd never met anyone who could track better than he could. I was young, he told them, and really confident in myself, so I just set off on a tiger hunt to get that tiger. He told them how he went back to the scene and followed the tiger. Night came quickly and he climbed a tree for an uncomfortable night. Worst night's sleep I ever had, he told them. And at dawn he continued the hunt. There was only one focus, finding that tiger. In the early afternoon he found the remains of the little girl. He gently built a cairn of rocks over her. It was the first dead body he'd seen up close. Not that there was a lot of body left. The hunt continued. The tiger appeared to be manoeuvring and stalking some of the rail workers. BP spent a second night in a more comfortable tree and continued at dawn again. It wasn't long before he found the tiger. It was lying down. Suddenly it was like the tiger had a sixth sense. It couldn't have smelt him. The wind direction was wrong, and BP was sure that he hadn't made a sound. But there it was. That tiger knew something and was swishing its tail and suddenly coming for BP. It wasn't as far away as he thought, and as he raised the rifle, he had a thought, why didn't I test fire this rifle? It didn't matter. The rifle worked fine. There was a thunderous roar and a great belch of smoke from the end of the barrel. It kicked like a mule, and BP wondered about how much powder was in the thing. Crazy thought as a giant tiger was bounding towards you. The bullet hit. BP knew straight away it wasn't fatal. It wasn't. The rifle head flinched. The tiger spun and fled into a thicket of thorns. BP followed up and saw the blood. In his mind was the thought of made the problem worse. He imagined the headlines. BP injures man-eater. Man-eater eats everyone in the village. He reloaded the rifle, powder, wad, bullet and a percussion cap. There was nothing else for it but to go into the thorns. He put the welding jacket and gauntlets on. Perhaps this is what he had expected when he'd taken them from the welders. The singlet that he normally wore certainly wasn't any protection against a tiger. Maybe I should have just left at that point in time, said BP, somewhat whimsically. But you know what? You have to do the right thing. He crawled through the thorns. There was a tunnel through them. He could see the tiger's blood, probably only a lung shot. The rifle was held before him and he wriggled on his belly. After what seemed an age, there was a clearing surrounded by thorns. In the centre of the thorns, there was the tiger at the far end of that small clearing. The clearing was just not very big at all, and the tiger was there. And BP didn't have any time. As he emerged from the tunnel, before he even had time to stand up, the tiger sprang from one end of the clearing to land on BP. All he could do, he was on his knees at that stage, trying to get up, was point the rifle with its bayonet skyward. He fumbled to get a finger around the trigger, but he had the gauntlets on. He got a thunderous roar out of the rifle, but the tiger had already landed right on the end of the bayonet, and he caught it right in the heart. The tiger's teeth had already sunk into his shoulder, and the claws had raked into his back, right through the welder's jacket. And that heavy 45 caliber bullet made double sure that the tiger was dead. There was plenty of blood, quite a bit of it BP's. He patched himself as best he could and then skinned the tiger. Be damned if he would leave that behind. He then crawled out from the thorns. He was feeling weak when he got out. There was a sight to behold when he got out from the tunnel. The workers from the rail line were there. When he got the tiger, he was only about 100 metres or so from the rail camp. They were all in a group and armed with shovels. BP saw the man who had given him the rifle. He handed it back to him and collapsed. When he woke up, he was in a bunk at the camp and a raging fever was taking hold. It was 2 weeks before a doctor arrived and declared the obvious by that stage. You'll live. The infection from the claws had been intense. There was a first aid kit in the camp and the Indian man had administered penicillin to him. When BP could get up, he checked his skin, the tiger's skin that he'd taken. The camp boys had stretched it and the sun cured it. BP quit the job. Before he left, he went along the dirt track to the village and found the family whose little girl had been taken. He gave them the skin and told them where her grave was. Some would say it was revenge on a tiger doing its job, but BP said it was stopping it from happening again. Then BP changed from serious to casual and said, "Nah, I fell in a gorse bush and wrestled it." "Yeah, right," said Hunter. The horn tooted outside. "Oh, that's Glocky," said Molly. "I was meant to be out there at 10:30. It was 10:45. She rushed up to the car and asked Marissa if she could have 5 more minutes. With an affirmation, she went back and thanked BP, and he said, "No, thank you for that dinner." BP then walked her to the rolls with a million questions in his mind and no time. When they were nearly at the car, Molly asked Hunter if he could take her to the end-of-year ball at the school. She'd never been to one before. Hunter said sure, he'd never been to one before either. When they got to the car, Molly said bye and reached up and kissed Hunter softly on his cheek. For the first time in her life, Molly felt like she belonged to something. Hunter had never experienced anything so soft and, well, just nice. BP told Hunter they'd have the fruit boxes done in a couple of days, and then it would be time for a break. As they were going off to sleep, BP said, "Boy, that Molly sure can cook." They finished the fruit boxes on time as BP had said, and he paid Hunter a healthy bonus.